Hello and welcome to Sequin Girly Creates. You may have seen one of my recent videos which was 5 essential handmaids, and I did that in conjunction with the Knotty Gnome, and she put a playlist together, so do go over and have a look. But I thought I would continue my 5 with some others in the series. Excuse the noise, that's the red kites calling to each other. They've got a nest. They'll stop in a bit. So this next one is going to be 5 sewing tips, and then there'll be a subsequent one that's 5 sewing secrets, and also 5 sewing tools. So let's get started today with 5 sewing tips. Let's start. So tip number 1 is look at the pattern and don't just look at the size guide, but look at the finish measurements. And sometimes even that's not enough, because what you'll find hidden on the pattern, often near the place where it's going to be, so near the waist or near the bust, will be the finished size measurements and sometimes the ease. And you will be surprised where you'll find it. You'll just see a little table somewhere. Here we go. So somewhere hidden on the pattern, obviously indie brands are different. They actually have them in their booklets and things. But on the big 4, here there's a little grid that says finished garment measurements. And then it gives the hip. And here it gives the hip for size 10 as a 43 inch. If we compare this on here, a size 10 is given the hip as 34 and a quarter. Now obviously that includes all the loose, because this is a loose flowy pair of shorts and trousers, but it helps you to think when you're between sizes, or whether you're thinking, do I want it loose and baggy or do I want it tight? So because this is only a bottom half height and there's only hip, there will be waist, and I've definitely seen it. I saw it somewhere else because I remember looking at it. There's hip, hip. I think it's on the waistband one, but that's okay. So you get the idea, is don't just go by what they tell you on here as which size you need. Look at the finish, look at the pattern. I've got a waist here and it doesn't have it on this one, but it did have it on the waist part. There'll be a bust one near a bust line somewhere. As I say, in indie patterns, they're often in their booklets. It will tell you the finished size, and it really helps you to think, how loose do I want it, how much ease do I want. Some patterns even tell you how much ease there is, which is the loose fabric that you would then gather in, or to allow, like here, I don't want this pulling tight, I want to be able to move, so you need some ease in there. But when you're thinking, am I a size 14 or 16, you might decide to go down to the 14 because you know there's enough ease and you don't want it too loose. So that's tip number 1. I'll make sure my patterns don't blow away. Tip number 2 is using a Sharpie when putting in an elastic waistband. So when we are threading elastic with a safety pin through a waistband, we can always worry about the twisting of the elastic, and also making sure that we don't then stitch together the wrong upside part. So if before you put the elastic in, you lay the elastic next to each other, do a line and do the same pointing up arrow, and then when it pops out the other end, you can check that neither of them have twisted. And actually when I did this one had twisted over, so I went around and found the twist. So this, really simple with a Sharpie or a biro, suddenly means that you can prevent any twisting as you go round. I want to thank Instagram for that one. Tip number 3 is, I got the fear from many of my wonderful fabrics of not wanting to cut into them, and it sort of made me be in this sort of comatose state of not using them for a long time. But make a toile or muslin, depending on what you call them, out of something that you either have in your stash that you don't love, or an old duvet cover or an old sheet, And here's the big part of the tip: you don't have to make the whole thing, just make the fitted part so you can get an idea of the fit, or just make it loosely and baste it together, so with big long stitches. Don't cut the full length of the skirt, don't do everything, just do the parts that you need to do to test it out, to see where you need to make the adjustments. But I used to think they weren't a good use of time, and I wanted to get to the good bit, but it is worth it to stop the fear. If you don't have any fabric like that, you can buy some cheap poly cotton, sort of £2 or £3 a metre, particularly in the south, particularly if you go to big fabric warehouses, and then you don't feel bad if it goes wrong. But also you might end up with a wearable toile as well that you can wear at home. Tip number 4, check the shoulders sit right, because often for someone like myself who's petite, like here, this is intentional, but they will be off the edge and it doesn't make your clothes look well fitted. So check before you finish. So I did that on this piece that I'm making right now, and the shoulder was too big, so I just went back in and did a second row of stitches, remembering that on the side you stitch you lose that much fabric from the other side, so it would be double as much is lost. So just come up close there so you can see there that I stitched again here from here, and even though that's about 1/3 of a centimetre, by the fact that it's on the other side too, that's 2/3 of a centimetre then came off the shoulder, and suddenly it sits just right. Many patterns are got done for sort of 5'5", 5'6" people, so they will have border shoulders. So if, like me, you're petite or you're narrow, check that shoulder fit and even snip it down next time on your pattern so you don't forget. And tip number 5 is, when you see the notches, which for many years when I did patterns I ignored, so let's address a notch. There's a notch. They look different on different patterns, but that's a notch. Some people cut out, the fabric pokes out. I don't do that because often I'm cutting right up to the selvage and I'm cramming everything in. When I've got the pattern laid on top of the fabric, I snip through the fabric and the pattern, so you can see there, look, that little snip, so that when I'm lining them up, I'm lining up the 2 snips. It means there's nothing to cut off at the end. It is really easy because it's always inside the seam allowance anyway, and it makes them easy to find, and it stops me having to shift the fabric more because I cut it out and then I go back and go snip and snip at the notches, and don't ignore the notches. There we go. I hope my 5 sewing tips were helpful. If you don't already, I'd love you to subscribe, because then you get notified of all my other videos, including my other tip series that are coming up. And also, if you want to see more making progress photographs, head over to Instagram, where I am Sequin Girly, and you can follow me there too. Happy sewing!